Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas. We're coming to you from Mount Soma, USA, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Today's podcast, we're going to kind of go about explaining the mechanics of some of the things I've been saying about the ancient knowledge and how it could help, how it could solve the global crisis. And all that's described by the ancient seers, the rishis that cognized the Veda thousands of years ago. This knowledge, I mean, it's a little bit like trying to explain, I don't know, a whole field of knowledge, modern physics, or, the vessel that holds all the different fields of knowledge, in fact, in one podcast. So we're just going at it from a perspective of, a nutshell presentation. So all the details and things aren't going to be there. And they're going to be things that, you may not be able to connect all the dots with what we're seeing here. But it will give you a big picture, I think, and a good understanding of generally how the thing works out. Now, to do that, before we can really get into these refined, deep technologies of the nature of existence, we first need to understand the nature of existence a little bit. So we're going to kind of go into this from an angle you may not expect. And what we're going to do is approach it from the perspective initially of the manifestation of existence. I mean, if we're going to learn a technology where we can really master the laws of nature, we need to understand the nature of nature. And so this is how that works according to the ancient seers. And even this, now, we're going to present it through the viewpoint of one facet of a multifaceted diamond. The way the Veda is structured, the way existence is structured, is that it's paradoxical. It's like there are an infinite number of simultaneously valid but contradictory realities. And we too easily lose ourselves into one. Whereas really, to understand the big picture, there has to be a unification of all those different facets into one wholeness, okay? I remember when I was in the 9th grade and I took my first algebra class, the front cover of the book, the algebra book, the textbook, was a diagram, a very simple diagram, but if you looked at it one way, it looked like there were 3 boxes. If you looked at it another way, it looked like there were 2 boxes. It was just a way of looking. Same thing, same reality, same field, but based on perspective, which facet of the diamond you're looking at, you saw it 2 different ways, okay? One window of perception is modern physics. When we take a look at the unified field, we can look at it from the perspective of modern physics. Turns out that that's kind of a bulky perspective, whatever degree of truth is there. It's not really technologically very available. I mean, you can build an atomic bomb, which isn't easy to do, but it's also not very refined. And there's so much more to the technology of the unified field than, something as crude as just building a bomb. So at any rate, what is existence? Let's start with that. The underlying basis of existence, the ancient seers tell us this. And interestingly enough, there are some modern physicists who are in the field studying it. And they say the more we study the unified field, the underlying basis of existence, the more we're realizing it's just consciousness. Well, the ancient rishis have been saying that for thousands of years. Pure isness equals pure consciousness. Isness equals consciousness. And so the idea is that before this universe existed, how did it come into existence? Well, consciousness, by its nature, is conscious. What could it be conscious of before this whole universe, before anything existed? The only thing that was, pure isness itself. So consciousness becomes conscious of itself. But an interesting thing happens there is that consciousness then perceives itself as other, and duality is born. conscious. It's like when you're brushing your teeth in front of the mirror and you catch your own reflection in the side mirror, and for a minute it feels like there are two people there. There's just one. Consciousness does that, but then it becomes conscious of those two things, and a third thing is born. And then consciousness becomes aware of those three, and a fourth thing is born. And it cascades out into infinity and creates an underlying structure, an underlying matrix. And that's what we're dealing with here. It's all the play of consciousness, as explained by the ancient rishis. So now there are two ways of gaining knowledge. One is to look out into the world and study it. Take a ball and drop it and see how long it takes to hit the ground, put it on a ramp and let it roll down, and do the math and figure out, velocity and kinetic energy and things like that. So it's basically based on observation. That's basically how it's been approached through Western knowledge, and it's accomplished a great deal. It's actually one little branch of the Veda, that type of acquisition of knowledge. But there's another form of gaining knowledge, and it's called cognition. The idea is that if everything is just consciousness, then you are, in your essence, that field of pure consciousness. Now, consciousness, you can look at it from a perspective of physics and it's just a kind of a thing, or you can look at it from a spiritual perspective and say it's God's consciousness. It's God, if you want. And so the idea then is that is the source of everything. So therefore, if you are that, you are one with everything. And so all knowledge of everything dwells within you because you are that. You see? So what the ancient rishis did, the way they offered the Vedic knowledge, and it was recorded in ancient Sanskrit texts, it's been available for thousands of years. It's incredible. They had physiology so refined. Even the earth, way thousands of years ago, was so pure. There were no disturbance from radio waves or what have you, And also it has to do with the karmic cycles of the planet, but that's another, again, there's so much to this. But to keep it simple, back when everything was very pure, the rishis brought their awareness to that deepest level. And down on that deepest level, there's that self-interacting dynamic. Consciousness becomes conscious of itself, then becomes conscious of those two things, and the third thing is born, and it cascades out into infinity. And so they perceived the underlying mechanics, the underlying basis, the underlying structure and dynamics of existence on its deepest level. And that's called the Vedic cognition. That's what the Veda really is. We can get into, again, this huge lectures here, but we could get into the actual structure of the Veda, the nature of the Veda, Purusheya, Apurusheya, Vedangas, Upangas. It's all done with mirrors. It's all the self-interacting dynamic of oneness, you see. But the idea then is that there's this source of infinite harmony and coherence that created, sustains, maintains this whole universe. It's a little bit like if you have a tree. If the roots are healthy, it feeds the whole tree. In other words, if you're living in communion with that underlying basis of life, the whole tree flourishes. And just like that, if we are living in harmony with the underlying basis of existence, our own being, then the physiology is healthy, the psychology is healthy, we are healthy. But here's what happens. Consciousness, when it becomes conscious of itself and creates this incredibly dynamic, complex, profound universe, we see patterns in it. We see patterns in that structure, and we become as if mesmerized by them. We become identified with that one perspective, that one facet of the diamond. And it's limited. And then somebody over here sees another perspective, looks through another facet. They see it a different way. And that applies to everything. it's almost like we don't really perceive, we project onto. And now that's where the global crisis comes in. Pick any field, any subject. What? The border, Mexican border. What's going on there? Well, some people see it one way. Well, these are human beings. They need support. They need help. How can we keep them out? They will come and they'll help by building our nation further. Other people look at it and say, well, they're coming here and they're going to destroy the thing. They're coming into the country. They're not vaccinated. We don't know anything about them. Al-Qaeda could be sneaking in with them. It's going to be a huge financial burden on the nation. And so you see, there's two different ways of looking at it. Now, that's one example, but we've got so many. Do you need voter ID? Do you have to have ID to vote? Or can anybody walk in and vote? Is it racist to require voter ID? Some judges, I guess, in North Carolina just decided that it is racist, gun control. What else, Adrian?
Education, vaccines.
Yeah, education, vaccines.
Everything that's been in the news.
Afghanistan, you name it, And
yeah.
So, but here's what happens now, is that one perspective tries to force its perspective on another. They create a news channel that's either liberal or conservative. Really, all they're doing there is preaching to the choir. And anybody who's of an opposing view hears that, and they just get offended by it. It just exacerbates their polarization from that perspective. And so it's like in the ancient Chinese writings, they say yin creates yang. The more you feed one perspective, the more powerful the other's perspective becomes. And that's the world today. And so in that sense, and just in that sense, but in that sense, it doesn't really even matter who's right. Because what is really happening, regardless of who's right, what's really happening is yin creates yang. There's more polarization. There's more negativity. There's more conflict. And eventually it leads to wars, And so that's the mess we're in. And that's from the perspective of the ancient seers. And the question then becomes, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? We still have our perspectives. I certainly have my perspectives, and I'm sure you have your perspectives on everything from, abortion to gun control or what have you. But how do these issues get resolved? Because pushing one perspective on another group, again, only alienates them further. So how do we resolve it? Well, there is that underlying source that brings the simultaneously valid but contradictory realities together into a unified whole. It's a source of all the infinite intelligence, wisdom, creativity, harmony that birthed this universe. And so if there was a way that people could start to function from that deeper level of, in one sense, common sense. What does common sense mean? Common sense means sensing into that level of life that is common to all humanity, the common denominator. Now you refine common sense even more, and what do you find? It's refined common sense is called wisdom. It's even a deeper communion with that source of infinite harmony, infinite intelligence. It's interesting because if you look it up in a dictionary, you look up common sense, it basically says wisdom. You look up wisdom, it says common sense. This understanding isn't there. It's not there. And it's so fundamental to the nature of life and how to live a life in abundance. Now, how do we tap into that? Well, two primary ways. For the individual, one way is meditation, but I'm not talking about any meditation. There are all kinds of meditations out there. And a lot of the meditations are basically trying to control the mind, still the mind, force the mind. That's not it. It's not about manhandling awareness. It's about allowing awareness to rest into its own true nature, pure consciousness, the consciousness that dwells at the depth of our being. who it is and what it is we really are, beyond thoughts, beyond relativity. Absolute means pure consciousness. Okay? And so I call that then proper meditation. It's not that the other meditations are improper. They have purposes. A lot of them, some of them are bad for you. It's programming. But a lot of them are involve just emotional indulgence. People are suckers for emotional indulgence. I'd like to say, if that's what you want, just go to a Madonna concert or something. But it's no substitute for proper meditation. And then we get into the whole field of left-handed tantra and prying open people's third eyes and all this stuff. That's all called left-handed tantra, and it's very damaging. People think they're getting enlightened, really they're going insane. But at any rate, again, these are all huge lectures we're trying to condense down into a short podcast. So that's one way, proper meditation. If you want to learn it, go to YouTube and go to Michael Mama's YouTube channel. You can find it there. In the first couple of videos there, how to meditate, and it's free. Learn that meditation. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Okay, it's out of the Himalayas. Now, I could go off on a lecture about the Himalayas here and what they are, but to say it succinctly, there's a stillness in those mountains. There's a quietness in those mountains that facilitates the ability to cognize. But even now, there's been so much invasion into those mountains, that it's not as readily available as it was thousands of years ago. Now, there's another technology offered by the cognitions of the rishis that can facilitate the purification of the environment, just like we talking about the purity of the Himalayas. There are technologies where we purify the environment so people's awareness just naturally rests into a deeper place. We're so caught up in the surface, buzz, 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 brain, identity with respect to force of perspective. It's just exhausting. But there are technologies offered by the ancient cognitions, technologies of the unified field, where we can build what I call a unified field generator. It's a facility that radiates the Shiva value. And when it comes out, when the Shiva value, the wholeness value, the infinite harmony value, when that radiates out into relativity, it's called the Rudra value. Rudra is the Shiva value as it comes into relativity and dissolves all the dross, the impurities, the negativity that dwells within people. That's why sometimes Rudra, the Rudra aspect of Shiva, is viewed as a terrible thing because it's or they say the destroyer, because it destroys impurity. That's a good thing. But if you hear it wrong, then you get all confused about the whole Shiva value, So at any rate, there's and that's what we do at Mount Soma. It's a Shiva temple. We do something called the Rudra Abhishek every single day, and it radiates that purifying influence to the environment. And people come here to Mount Soma, they don't even know anything about any of this, but they come here and they walk around, and we hear it very often. What is this place? There's a feeling here. We've had people who come here and just wander in and they say, that's it, I'm moving here. It's a very powerful influence and a very positive influence. And the ancient rishis provided a technology, and we're in the process of building it. This is what Mount Soma is all about. The Shiva temple we have is just the first step, where you can build a unified field generator that radiates so much peace, so much harmony, so much coherence, that it can transform not just a little local environment, but a whole continent. And they say that one of these unified field generators on each continent, 6 of them, is enough to purify the whole world. But of course, the United States, being in the position it's in international dealings, is the key, you see? So that's why we're here, and that's what we're doing, and the technology is there. And it's, there's so much talk about, oh, world peace, and let's all hold hands and sway, or, sing songs or whatever, and this equinox, so let's go pray for world peace. That's all good. That's all fine. If that's what you want to do, great. I'm not knocking it. But there's a technology that's there that's so powerful, far more powerful, far more effective, and that's what we're doing. And I'm not making this up. It's not coming from me. It's cognitions of the rishis. And we know that there's this knowledge, this deeper knowledge works, because there are temples in India that we don't even understand how they built them. One big, huge temple all chiseled out of one big piece of rock. And they can't find the pieces of debris anywhere. Where did it go? Tons of it. And granite pillars that when you tap them, they ring. We don't know how they did it even to this day. How did they build the pyramids? There are ancient technologies, tons of them. And, what do people come up? Oh, well, maybe UFO people came down and built them. I mean, maybe that's true. But the thing is, most of that stuff was done at an age where we had a different approach to gaining knowledge. Not from the surface, but from the depth. Cognition. And the key to all the different technologies, ancient technologies, is then to enable the awareness to become free of limitation, paradigm identity. I mean, we're caught up in paradigms of left versus right, but there are paradigms of just how the mind works. That's why I like to say it's not about new thoughts, it's about a whole new way of thinking. And to do that, the mind has to be freed from the paradigm identities that have been imposed upon it. And again, this unified field generator and proper meditation, those are the two most powerful tools you've got to make that happen. Even here in this talk, to get an idea conceptually of what we're talking about, hopefully it can inspire people to say, oh yeah, I want to move in that direction. I want to expand my awareness. I don't want it to be a love and light, la la land kind of thing, but real. It's called human evolution. The next step of human evolution isn't so much about changing the brain physiology as it is about learning in the material sense, but it's actually learning how to refine so that this brain of ours can be used effectively. Some people think human beings are not as evolved as animals because animals don't destroy the planet as much as human beings do. Well, that's not really exactly right. Human beings are the most evolved animal on this species on the planet, but it's a very powerful tool, the human awareness, and they haven't learned how to use it properly yet. And they're in improper use of a very powerful tool like that. I like to say, if you're going to run off the road, I'd rather do it in a little toy red wagon than do it in a Porsche. We have this Porsche of awareness, this incredibly evolved physiology, and we need to learn to use it properly. And to do that, it's just a matter of refining the physiology, purifying it out, coming from a deeper place that's beyond paradigm identity, where yin creates yang and everybody hates everybody else. That's basically it. That's it in a nutshell. Now, it's one thing to get this intellectually, and hopefully you follow me along enough and you can say, okay, I get what he's saying. It's another thing to work with it enough that you're like, you know what? That's right. It's not just a cool thought. It's not just another new, neat perspective. It's an understanding of life that frees us from all perspectives. Some people have said to me, well, isn't that just another perspective? Well, I say, yeah, it is. But the beauty of this perspective is that it self-destructs. In other words, we don't get indoctrinated into one belief system, but we go through this portal to come from a place that is beyond the limitation of any belief system, you see, including the one that got you there, Adrian, anything else?
No, that's really great. I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I think we forget that, we get lost in our own ideologies, and there are countless ideologies. And the goal is to find out the ones that, like you said, are most life supporting in the moment. And, to do that, you really have to be coming from that deep well of wisdom that you're talking about,
Yeah. If you hear this wrong, it can almost sound offensive, but truth is really what's most life supporting for the moment. What do I mean by that? Well, they're paradoxical realities. Which do you align with? The one that destroys life or the one that feeds it? The one that nourishes it? Simultaneously valid but contradictory realities, but which one are you going to align with? And it's going to change from moment to moment. It's not about finding that one ice cream cone in the sky facet of the diamond that negates all the other facets. No, it's beyond that. You see? We could talk about, I didn't get into manifestation of space-time, and there's so much, and it's such beautiful knowledge. But that's got to be for another time. All right, Adrian, what else? Anything else? Or are we finished for today?
What about Maya?
Oh, well, Maya is a Vedic term, a Sanskrit term that basically is about when we look at the dazzling display of the manifestation of what comes about from consciousness interacting with itself. Maya is when we get so enamored, so lost in the illusion of a perspective, a story, a viewpoint, an interface with that incredible manifestation that we lose our connection with our own true nature. We start to define ourselves in context of what we've lost ourselves to. And that's called Maya, illusion. Yeah, good, Adrian. That's good to bring that up,
Yeah, and the deck of cards.
You want me to do the deck of cards? All right.
Yeah, I love the deck of cards.
All right. So imagine that there's this self-interacting dynamic, and people get caught up in a perspective and lose themselves to the Maya. Well, that's called relativity. It's all relative to perspective. But there is a self-interacting dynamic that occurs within the field of pure consciousness itself. It's called the transcendental level. And this is called apurusheya. It's not man-made. And by man-made, purusha is usually translated man-made. It's relativity made. It's Maya made. You can say that way. But then there's apurusheya, which is beyond that. It's that self-interacting dynamic before the awareness gets lost to a perspective. So it's kind of like superfluid. And that's the Rig Veda, the part of the Vedic cognitions that are about that nature of existence, that level of existence that lies beyond relativity. Now, on that level, and this is a tough one to wrap your head around, it's pre-space and pre-time. Space-time, even modern physicists will tell you, is a manifestation that occurred. And now this is at a particular stage in the manifestation of existence. Now we can say, well, if there's a particular stage, that implies time, doesn't it? There's a sequentiality there. First this happened, then this happened. And to explain that, we go with the deck of cards. Let's say you have a deck of cards and you set it on a table. And time goes across this way, in a graph. But this is all here. It's zero time. It's a deck of cards. All those cards exist simultaneously because there is no time. But now if you take that deck of cards and you spread it out over the face of space and time, this card, then that card, then that card thing, you get sequentiality. And that's where you get the whole field of space-time and existence, relativity as we know it. Relativity is very much based on space and time with infinite simultaneity of everything. There's no space, there is no time. But nevertheless, the sequentiality is still structured within it. First there's this card, then there's that card, then there's that card, then there's that card, until you get all the way to the top. You see? So within the structure of pure consciousness, before it manifests, there are all of these different Upanishads and all that, 10 mandalas, Rig Veda, all of that. You see? And that is the groundwork. That is the underlying matrix that when it manifests through the field of Maya, through the field of illusion, through the field of awarenesses losing themselves to a particular pattern of cards as they're dealt out on the table, you see, that births life as we know it, life in the relative, you see. Good. I guess that's it, huh, Adrienne, for now?
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Okay, good. Thanks for listening, everybody. And I mean, we could go on. I lecture on. I mean, there's so much to this.
I was like, there's so much, you know, even when you go into each little portion, the facet, the superfluidity deck of cards, there's lectures upon lectures in there, you know. Like, I kind of want somehow for you to get to all of them in one podcast.
I know.
You know,
it's a huge, vast, exquisite knowledge.
It is. It's so
but
beautiful.
It needs to be taken step at a time. And if for no other reason, then if people get too overwhelmed all at once, then they just want something simple.
Yeah.
It's just too vast and too huge. So just let me, you know, sing hallelujah and hop around under the full moon and think that that's going to save the world. You know? But
well, what you're talking about is being able to interface with the mechanics of the universe, which is so much more deep than doing something that is just a ritual on the surface. So, like you said, a lot of those can be beautiful. And, you know, in my search for this knowledge, you know, I tried a lot of different things, but they don't go to the core of existence, which is where all of these mechanics are truly so powerful and can make real rapid change and, you know, in a person, in the realities that we're living within. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing the knowledge, because it helps. I think it really helps people keep their balance in this time.
And it may seem like, oh, why do I need to know all this stuff? But otherwise you get off on tangents that are just not really connected to the reality and the true nature of existence, you know?
Right.
And so at least some basic understanding is so important.
Yeah, I think so too. Thanks, Michael. This was great.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we'll talk again with you next week.